Alright, we're back with more college football coverage. Obviously, I'd be in a little bit of disbelief, understanding that one of the first college football games of this upcoming season will see North Carolina feature in a game against TCU to open the season once more. We all know how that went last year. Don't know why they're doing that, but of course, we're near that time, just a couple of weeks away or so. And there has been some key developments in the college football landscape, none to the extent of how it was going with the entire Brendan Thorsby conversation, but there is a matter pertaining to eligibility, specifically regarding those players who are entering their fifth season or higher and looking to remain on a roster for this year and potentially beyond. It's all dependent on circumstances, of course. This matter pertains to Thomas Castellanos, and I had heard a little bit about it a couple of weeks ago, so I wanted to take some time to look into that because Castellanos, of course, spent his last season at Florida State. It started off as well as it possibly could have, logging a win against Alabama, and the finish to the year was not as strong. They underwhelmed once again, and you can argue that he tailed off in production by the end of the season. You could say that Mike Norvell Jr.'s job is in ultimate danger entering this year, but of course Florida State has taken their time to move on from this, assuming that Thomas Castellanos would be drafted by this point. At around the same time that Thomas Castellanos exited college football, at least from what we knew, the NCAA made a wave of changes specifically to the eligibility rules. They tried to place them into specific categories and had a heightened sense of emphasis in regards to fifth-year players or greater, as well as, trying to distribute it by age and things of that nature. They tried to revamp this entire process because it got to a point where they felt, in a sense, and maybe some schools had a say in this as well, people felt that this was being abused in a sense. That not all of these fifth year, sixth year, seventh year players who applied for this much eligibility had actual reasoning to do so. Whether it be them, redshirting a freshman year, having a medical redshirt due to injury, or other things like that make logistical sense. Anything outside of that realm, it felt like they were just going completely overboard. And we saw that across a lot of different collegiate sports. So they had this discussion, and you saw that along with other sweeping changes in college football and college basketball specifically, making it a little bit difficult, in theory, for people to come back and play. Now, we saw that Trinidad Chambliss earlier in the year, after his season at Ole Miss, was able to win a hearing for an injunction and have that granted to him for the rights to come back this year. Obviously, he's projected as one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC and a potential Heisman candidate by the end of the year. He won that. Diego Pavia, of course, did not have the same luck trying this also in the year. And, of course, you have seen a lot of other players over this course of time make the attempt on a smaller scale to return to college football despite maybe wearing out their welcome. It's been a mixed bag of results. And so Thomas Castellanos at this point, all he can really do is sit and wait through the draft process to see if his name would get called or if he would be passed up. Eventually, he would go undrafted. And so the, alternatives there are potentially going to the UFL, potentially making a roster as a UDFA if they pick them up, or going to the CFL, maybe trying something out in a semi-pro league or returning back to college. As far as we know to this point, by the time this decision was made, none of those other invitations really got extended to him. And you could say that's because of his playing style at the quarterback position. I mean, this is a guy who is truly one of the more athletic players you'll find. He just cannot control his frame. I believe he's like 5'9", so he's on the shorter end of quarterbacks overall. And, of course, the stigma surrounding that is it's going to be harder for them to see over the line of scrimmage. It's going to be a struggle to remain accurate in the league, knowing that this kind of pressure is exceeding whatever physical trait you might have and overpowering it to a T, to where you don't have the option to rely on other athletic feats. They're going to turn you into a standard backup quarterback in this sense. If you stand at that height and you don't have a lot of strength on you to maybe take some of those hits that other quarterbacks would be conditioned to handle. Castellanos does have a good tally of numbers over the course of his years, but in terms of season-to-season progression, you're not seeing anything truly jump out at you when you look at Thomas Castellanos' body of work compared to that of his peers. So while he is a good player in college, there genuinely might not have been a thought that this would translate over to the NFL, leaving Thomas Castellanos to have to wonder and ponder about what he would do next. And then you would get a couple of reports a few weeks back that would change the game for Castellanos a little bit. Now, as this article from On3.com states, and via Pete Nakos, who wrote it, it says that, quote, according to them, a class-wide ruling by the U.S. District Court of Colorado on Thursday, July 30th, ended with Castellanos being granted a fifth year of college eligibility as part of a preliminary injunction against the NCAA that suspended the organization's transfer rules. So you have that domino out of the way, and what it is referring to is something that extends far beyond just Thomas Castellanos. Because, of course, there are many other players who confront the same scenario. For one reason or another, whether you have an excess of talent on a given team that will affect the ability of some of these players to see the field, or, again, medical injuries or things of that nature, you're going to have a small percentage of college players that make it to the NFL. And a lot of these guys get wrapped up into the cycle of, being a rotational piece or ranking far lower in the totem pole for a team and the production that they will receive from them or the repetition that they will receive on a roster. Not everybody can go out and be a superstar or a bona fide number one type of player on a lineup filled and rife with talent coming from all over the country. It's difficult to find your footing there if you are already at a lower starting point. And unfortunately, a lot of careers in collegiate football in that way, where they do not, get to the level of success that they hope for. And again, that could vary in terms of the reasons why. But they go on to, take up other professions in their lives and don't get an opportunity to play the sport again at that high of a level, or extend this and parlay it into an experience in the pros. It's difficult to make that happen. Castellanos, if it would have gone that way, would not be the only person to tell that story ever, transferring from college over to the pros. What it does do for Castellanos is it gives him an opportunity, if he so chooses, to head back to college football. And a lot of, the conversation surrounding where he'd end up is honestly up for debate, which becomes very important when the next portion of information comes into play here. But as for, this overall decision, it pertained to members specifically written in the documentation from the class of 2022 that started football collegiately around this time and would have their, tenures and their, links to a team or to the organization at large up and over with by 2026. Castellanos, of course, got his start in 2022. The thing is that he redshirted in the UCF system because they already had a quarterback there taking over the starting reps. He didn't see the field. He only got a few snaps across 5 games. So he was allowed to redshirt from that point. That's the standard. And he chose to do that. We know the rest that has happened for him to this point. He's seen time at Boston College, was a bona fide starter there for a school that largely didn't do a whole lot. Obviously, he went to Florida State last year as a redshirt senior, if you will, and proceeded to put together, again, a decent year with more exposure for a much more, I guess you could say, praised ACC team, if you will. Because Boston College, of course, they've been mediocre for a while now, but Florida State, at the very least, over the past decade, they've reached a great level of success. They've had a much higher peak, and generally, when it comes to recruiting, the name alone is going to help them a lot, in theory. They just haven't been able to maintain that every single year, with Mike Norvell Jr. being in the system and with them having, some pretty lackluster seasons since their undefeated, at least what should have been an undefeated and CFP-bound season all the way back in 2023-24. Of course, they didn't get that, and that drew the ire of a lot of their fans. Then you have the next couple of years going the way that they have. Clearly, they've been trying to turn it around, and they thought that Castellanos could be the beacon of change for them. That is not what necessarily happened for the full season. And what they need is consistency. Castellanos, for his credit here, to have an opportunity to extend your lifespan in college and maybe give yourself one more good shot at entering into a true draft position by the time we get around to 2027, it's not something that you can knock the guy for, especially when you consider that in the era of this NIL resurgence, after the House bill passed to bring it back, following Ed O'Bannon's lawsuit all the way back in the mid-2010s, early 2010s, it gives players an opportunity to earn money. How they get that money and how the schools distribute it out, of course, that's come under fire, depending on which program that you're affiliated with. But for these players, the difference between being able to still earn around $1 million or so, depending on how good you are as a player, is worth it. And, these teams, if they believe that you are so damn talented and that they desperately need your services, there have been some offers out there that seem tantalizing to recruits, to people who are looking to enter into the NFL and will literally come back to play for their given organization because the money is that good, comparable to any contract that falls outside of at least a top 10 pick. Of course, the value of a contract in the NFL decreases by first round pick, and then as you get lower and lower in the rounds, there's less and less guaranteed money as it is. There are less and less guaranteed years on that deal as you go through the entire drafting process. And essentially, if Thomas Castellanos were to accept the role as a UDFA, it would be an uphill battle for him to climb in terms of making a roster as it is, and he would not be earning as much. So when you are in his position, you're trying to play those two sides of the coin here. You'd much rather try to at least make a name for yourself being one of the better players on a different roster in college, hoping that they can give you a good amount of net worth, rather than potentially being out of the pros entirely after training camp and not bringing in a lot of income. Also, the way that Thomas Castellanos plays, his skill set specifically, it does seem to fit best in college at the moment. Because you also have to question just how much an NFL coach could truly, and yes, this has been a debate for a while. This has been what some people have said in regards to, specific coaches in the NFL and coordinators, bringing bits and pieces of the, I guess you have NFL coaches with these backgrounds derived from specific colleges, and you also have college coaches now, adapting bits and pieces of the NFL game. So in theory, you could say that Castellanos is ready. How he moves around on the field would suggest otherwise, especially when it comes down to how he scrambles out of breakdowns for offensive plays. Like, as shifty as he is, he's not guaranteed to break out of those, sack contains and pressures each and every single time he's on an NFL field. It's not a given. He's going to have to earn that, and he's also a bit slight as well. So, again, constantly getting knocked down, how many hits can he truly take before his other abilities are severely affected? So all that factors into him trying to come back. But there's another layer to it, and it's that the Florida State team, they were active in the transfer portal this offseason. And I kind of went into it a little bit earlier on. They got themselves Quintrevion Wisner, the running back from Texas, in the transfer portal. Most importantly, they got Ashton Daniels, the backup quarterback for, I believe, Auburn, to now bring his talents over to Florida State. And they've been working over the course of this entire offseason from, spring ball to all the workouts over the summer. They've been working to incorporate him into their roster and kind of build this team around him offensively. That doesn't leave a lot of room for Castellanos, and they know it. So, from his standpoint, even if he comes back, the value of coming and returning to Florida State won't be existent for him. He's not going to play. So he needs to go somewhere that desperately needs a bona fide starter at the quarterback position, if you will. And this is what, brings about this development here. Because as the article goes on to state, quote, Castellanos is expected to file a lawsuit in Texas requesting an injunction against the NCAA and for a judge to allow him to enter the transfer portal. With last week's ruling in the U.S. District of Colorado, Castellanos was granted a 5th year as part of the class-wide preliminary injunction against the NCAA. Judge Charlotte Sweeney wrote in an order earlier this week that the Colorado suit does not open the transfer portal, which is why Castellanos is preparing to file one. So again, it gave everyone, including Castellanos from the 2022 class, that ran out of eligibility this season, if they were still on a team, a chance to gain one more extra year of eligibility. It locked them in place because it never stated that they were given the ability to move on from the roster they were already locked into at the time of the end of their eligibility. And so if you had, let's say, a defensive tackle involved in this same, lawsuit here, spending his time with a team like, say, Notre Dame, having as many, trench players as they do, if his eligibility was up by the time that 2026 rolled around and he was still on Notre Dame and this lawsuit passed, got its ruling by late July, he'd still be locked in to Notre Dame. And that's what the situation was for Thomas Castellanos to this point. He wanted to get out of it because, again, he's not going to play if he is aiming to build up more in his resume and stack together a great enough season to get looks from NFL guys and also make a little bread while he's at it. It just would not work out for him because Ashton Daniels is their guy. And, while you can't forecast a lot of these things, as the situation is currently looking, it's not an offer that Castellanos can be willing to take up here. Like, he's got to move on. He's got to free himself up. That's how he's feeling. So that came into the, limelight a little over a week ago to this point, and there hasn't been a lot in terms of an update surrounding it. But it is going to be interesting to see what they do, because Castellanos is not necessarily a player who has a lot of vitriolic criticism like I think that Diego Pavia did, to be completely honest with you. And Pavia carried himself as an underdog, but he carried himself with a little bit of cockiness. He was brash, and to be honest, when he was playing successful with this Vanderbilt team, turning this program around, people fell in love with that, at least on the outside looking in. Some of his contemporaries did not take a lot of heed to that, and he played himself into a position where it got even worse after trying to trash Fernando Mendoza's Heisman win and trying to, talk stuff about other Heisman candidates, trying to downplay their seasons and cast himself up as this prospect that could not be touched whatsoever. So the optics of that completely changed around. I think Castellanos, to his credit, like Trinidad Chambliss, the optics are on his side right now, and he can use that to his advantage. So it could be a process that still takes a little bit of time to figure out, and we're a few weeks away from the regular season. So, with this lawsuit, even if a team does sign him, one, who is it going to be? Who's going to be willing to take that risk? Even if they're in need of a quarterback, there's a chance that in recruiting, they've probably got a guy ready to go right now. Someone who's been waiting in the, windows for at least a couple years now, trying to establish themselves as the starting quarterback and the big man on campus. And you can't have Castellanos come in and take that spot, because you understand that it likely would be for at the least a year. That's all you can guarantee him. You don't know if he's going to give you 2, dare I say 3. That would be extreme for him to be a 7th-year quarterback. You just can't really put that up to chance right now. You want to go with the card that you've already got in your back pocket here. You don't want to try to play a hand that you literally cannot risk. It just wouldn't be worth it for another college. And then even then, another program who might try to sign him on, can you really guarantee that he's still in peak football shape right now? I'm sure he's keeping himself ready and trained, but we don't know how much simulated football action he's really been involved in since he took his last snap at Florida State. And potentially, participated in, I would think, the Pro Day for Florida State to prepare for the draft. There's no guarantee in terms of how many hours he has truly put in to, maintain the work and maintain the style of play and keep up with, a lot of the different trends over this time. Plus a different playbook, one that he may not have been accustomed to. Because again, these teams whether it be, Boston College, whether it be Florida State. Last season, specifically, they were primarily run heavy, I would say. They wanted to, establish presence there, incorporate motions and try to utilize their speed as best as possible. That did not really, play out all that well for him, but it's probably where his strong suit lies. Trying to adjust his style of play now in a different offensive system could be an issue, because these are plays that other players in that lineup have been working on for months. You'd be asking him to, as soon as he gets there, get right into the film room, get right in touch with the coaches, and try to figure out a way to learn the playbook within a matter of days, depending on what they rule and depending on when they decide to allow him to start a game. He's going to have to turn around extremely quick and pick up on these tendencies. And that is difficult for any player to do when you lack the reps with this team and when you lack the reps with other players. So, you would hope that things pan out well for Thomas Castellanos here. The reality of the situation is that it's genuinely an unknown, because he still has to go out there and show you that he is good enough to warrant starting caliber consideration at the quarterback spot. He has to show you that he is a fast learner, a very fast learner, in regards to picking up, plays in the playbook and mastering them enough to run them with the top lineup on a team, with the starters that he is going to have to build chemistry with. And trying to do that through a game is difficult. Again, these teams are spending countless amounts of time with each other for months on end now. Trying to, learn about each other and how they operate on the football field. Trying to figure out ball placement, trying to figure out, placement of handoffs, trying to get a feel for, the snap count that works the best from the center to the quarterback, trying to, shore up on communication and things of that nature. You can't really mimic that in a game. It's built upon. It is worked on behind the scenes. And that is just not something that you can feign. Like, these teams that he would face off against in the event that he is picked up, they're going to recognize firsthand the lack of experience that he has with the specific roster he's joined. So, there's a lot of risk involved in it. Yes, he wants to leave Florida State, and a truly, desperate roster could allow him to fulfill, the initial task and get his name into the, draft pool stratosphere. It could do that. But it could also completely tank his value and hurt the very team that he signs with. Potentially set back their recruiting classes, potentially, cause someone in that administration to be fired, depending on how this decision is viewed and the way that it plays out. Like, it is much bigger than just Thomas Castellanos himself. And a lot of these teams are going to have to, deal with all of the talk surrounding that, no matter what happens in the specific lawsuit. But all of that remains to be seen, and so, it's something that, at the very least, if there's an update, I'll try to see what's up with it, but for now, it's relatively unknown what's going to happen. So that would be this portion of it. But a couple of other, minimal things here. That was going to be the main focus of this one, just trying to get that piece of information out there, break it down a little bit. But a few days back, from Pete Thamel and other sources, Northwestern football got a $35 million commitment from the Uihlein family over the next 3 years. I believe it is Dick and Liz Uihlein. Dick being a former player at that program for a few years, if I'm not mistaken. Whatever the case may be, it is something that projects to help them in the very least. I mean, let's be honest about the situation. You can say that the Big Ten, now being one of the super conferences out there, one of the many super conferences out there after realignment, it is still a top-heavy conference in a sense. When you look at the Ohio States, you look at the Michigans, you look at the Oregons, the USCs, and we'll say for now, honestly, that's probably a good top four. At the moment, other teams can creep up into there occasionally with your Penn States, with your Marylands, with your Washingtons. But those four now, as a trio, and before realignment, it would probably still be Ohio State and Michigan to this point. You're not grouping Penn State in there right now as the cream of the crop in that conference. It's highly top heavy, and a lot of the recruits, the best ones around the country, and especially in the hot spots, your Texases, your Californias, states like that that are known and just constantly pump out football talent, elite level football talent. A lot of those schools are going to bring in those kinds of players. It's not to say that some of the other teams in the conference who don't have as much success with recruiting cannot occasionally make the most out of a blue chip prospect every now and then. And clearly, when you have these blowout games or games that sneak up on better competition in the Big Ten, it is likely due to a player that fell through the cracks a little bit and fell in their lap to give them an opportunity to at least compete in that specific game. That is how it generally works out, though. The lesser recruits, your 3 stars, lower than that on occasion, they tend to go down to other schools in the Big Ten. Rarely do you see them make out with the top-end talent across the nation. And as a result, it is the same outcome every season with, those teams with high status finishing at the top of the conference and others finishing towards the bottom. Northwestern has fell victim to that several times over, and it really is boiling down to that. While it can be said that yes, they're a journalism school, not necessarily focused on football, at the same time, knowing how the game has changed with the kinds of money being spent by other programs across college football just to be relevant and compete for titles. Northwestern does get the sense at some point that they may have to step their game up. And again, even with a boost in overall, gifts like this one, $35 million over the next 3 years is huge. And it will provide them with an opportunity to, add more resources to their program and maybe go out there, use some of it to pick up some great players for themselves over the next few years. You can't discount that at all. Like, that changes a lot. It increases their value a little bit. And at the very least, they should be able to build out a solid roster if they use that money correctly. Still, the money is one thing. It is another to convince people to come to Northwestern. You can have the money, but for the best talent, word alone, coaching alone is not going to influence them to come to Northwestern. That's just being very blunt. And, you hate to look at it that way. But that's true. Like, compared to other schools in the Big Ten. Even when you look at programs like Rutgers, I would even say, there are instances where you will have them choose other programs in the Big Ten over Northwestern. Granted, the success of the team, and especially with Pat Fitzgerald now being at Michigan State, you've lost that kind of connection there. With having a former alum, being in your ear and telling you about the glory days of the team. They have had instances when Fitzgerald was there. I was watching a video about their 1994 season. They've had successful seasons before. It's not out of the realm of possibility. But they come very far in between of one another. It just doesn't really happen often. And as a result, the prestige of the football program does take a massive hit. So to reinvigorate that, you do have to start from somewhere. And I think that with that in mind, seeing that they are doing this over the next 3 seasons, it is a great start. It's a great, add to their program. This could truly be beneficial to what they attempt to build. They just need to make sure that, over these next 3 years, maybe larger donations to the program start to come in if they play their way into being a really good football team by the end of this balance here. And that's what I would say. 3 years is a pretty good baseline, a pretty good foundation to set. A lot can happen in 3 years for any team, realistically speaking. So, let's just put it like this. Sure, Northwestern might still have their struggles, but by the time this 3 years is up, if they are, in the conversation of being one of the better teams in the conference, if they are competing somehow for a conference title appearance, then it's like, yes, you're going to keep having them come in. If they fall short, it could still happen in that way. They could still, donate a lot of money, but it's going to be hesitant. It's not going to come from the greatest of places, because you would have shown them that even with such a boost in money from within, you could not field a competent roster. And that would be the challenge for everyone in that Northwestern athletic administration. Your priorities are going to lie elsewhere as an academic school. And honestly, I can't blame them, because education clearly needs a large boost everywhere in this day and age. That's truth of the situation. Keep on keeping on in that regard to assert yourself as one of the more prestigious academic institutions out there. That's necessary. You're not going to get by having each and every single college out there be so reliant on athletics. If they want to start taking them seriously, though, this would be the time to prove it a little bit. That's what I would say for that. And then earlier today, per Pete Thamel as well, and other sources, the Army football team signed Jeff Monken to a 5-year contract extension. Obviously, the brother of Todd Monken, now an NFL head coach with the Browns, it makes a lot of sense. And, let's just put this in the nicest way possible. And it's kind of obvious as well. Army, if we're talking about schools that are clearly not known for their football, Army would fall right into that category. They're a military program. You're developing people to literally serve in the armed forces. They do happen to, play football if they aren't committed early. But eventually, upon graduation, you have these same individuals going to serve. Whether it be, like a shorter term, for example, what Uihlein had to go through going from Navy, their sworn rival. That would be a good example. Obviously he's in the NFL right now, but he had to spend a little bit of time, carrying out those orders upon graduation. And similar things happen there at Army. So with the focus being on literally serving the country, of course, you're not worried about these high-level recruits, okay? They could give a rat's ass about that. It does not matter there. And, clearly it has shown for the better part of time leading up to Monken's tenure there. Let's just be honest. They are a team that would consistently get beaten the hell down by other big-time opponents. Now, they would be able to get you a few wins in and out every single year, but not enough to be taken as a serious program. And let's be honest, shades of that still happen today. But you look at Monken's tenure in a nutshell, and quite frankly, he's had some of the greatest success that program has seen literally since their last head coach retired. Well, not their last truly prolific head coach retired. Let's put it like that. Because you got to go all the way back. They mentioned that the amount of wins Monken has as of this day are only second to Earl Blake, a head coach who was there from 1941 to 1958 and logged 121 wins in his career with a 76.8% win percentage. Literally, since, some of the earliest timing surrounding the Cold War onward, Army has not had this kind of success in football. And what Monken has been able to do for that program since then is nothing short of an absolute miracle. I mean, despite them still being viewed as a team that won't garner a lot of respect from the national standpoint, this Army team has occasionally gotten ranked a few times. They've had 3 10-win seasons. 2024 Army got 12 wins on the year. And despite, the gripes you may have with them getting to that level, despite whatever qualms you may have about the level of competition that they're playing, to see Army with a 12-win season is, again, that is honestly amazing. They've made multiple bowl games, and in fact, Monken all-time has led them to the most bowl games for any head coach ever. Now, again, Army has, national championships already, and they had multiple, if I'm not mistaken, under Blair himself. In fact, they went back to back to back in terms of national championships under Blake. So, Monken hasn't gotten to that specific status just yet. At the same time, with you again already being grouped in a sector of the college football world that literally couldn't care less about the product you put on a college football field, he's still got the players that play committed to a winning culture, at the very least. And that takes a lot. They went undefeated with an 8-0 record in their conference that year. And again, to reach those milestones as a head coach with this team, you have to give him all the respect in the world for that. It's not an easy job to take on this team knowing that the priority is to develop them elsewhere, not on the football field, and to still, trudge through season and have at least a model of consistency to back. It's pretty damn good. They've got an above 500 record since entering the AAC in 2024, And again, you have multiple 10-win seasons here. They are overall above 500 under his tenure. There have been some bad losses, but there have also been some truly compelling games. There have been some tremendous wins on Monken's front. Like, they can hang. They can go toe-to-toe with a team on any given day. And more often than not, they've been successful. So, like, that is just fully deserving of, an extension at that point. Considering that this team isn't really, functioning with the intent to build the best football squad in the world when they suit up. That is not their MO. Yet, they're formidable enough to constantly level up and, gain a bit of fandom from outsiders just by watching the coaching job that Jeff Monken has done. So, all the credit in the world to him. But yeah, those are all of the relevant updates in the college football world to this point. Again, fair amount Tom spent on Castellanos for sure, but to have information like that come in is a far cry from how it was for at least a couple of months there, just focusing specifically on one player. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.